Good Tuesday morning, everyone. This is Doug Farrar, editor of Touchdown Wire and the USA Today Sports Media Group. To my left, to my right, on your I always get this confused every week. It's kind of obnoxious. Anyway, the guy over there in the NFL, is NFL Films? Oh,
NFL Films, yeah.
NFL Films, which is where you are in Mount Laurel, New Jersey.
Where I always am.
Yes. Greg Cosell of NFL Films and ESPN's NFL Matchup. And in today's X's and O's video / podcast / series of articles, Greg, we're going to talk about, I love this. This is one of my favorite things to do every year. Scheme fits for different draft prospects, the best marriages of former NCAA players with their new NFL teams. So we've got a few guys to talk about. I wanted to start with, and this is the most obvious one, Anthony Richardson going to the Colts and Shane Steichen's offense. If we didn't talk about this, it would be kind of weird. So,
well, it's funny you say that because obviously, as you do, as I do, we evaluate these players before the draft.
Right.
We do not know who's going to draft them. You can read all kinds of rumors. I mean, all those things are rumors, all kinds of mock drafts, but you never know until the draft happens. So was the last line I typed in my transition, Doug. I'm going to just read the last line. And I just want to reiterate that obviously I watched him well before the draft.
Right.
I said, I could see Richardson early in his career working in an offense similar to the Eagles offense with Jalen Hurts, with multiple run game concepts that start with the quarterback and a pass game that works off the run game with defined reads and throws, given the greater predictability of defensive alignments and coverages. So that's the last thing I typed in my transition for Anthony Richardson, which I probably typed 2 months ago.
Right.
And then, of course, he gets drafted by the Colts, and their head coach was, amazingly enough, the offensive coordinator for the Eagles last year.
Go figure. Yeah, and then he said, Steichen, is it Steichen or Steichen? I want to get this right. Steichen, okay. That's a good question that definitely helps. Steichen said when asked how Richardson's running ability raises his floor. When a guy can run and add that element to your offense, it's a big plus. It puts stress on defenses, and obviously he has that capability. I just wouldn't sleep on his throwing ability either. That ball comes out pretty now. He can spin it. He's got a huge arm, and he's made some huge plays in the pass game. We're excited to work with him. I know, I mean, you do Eagles stuff all the time, so I know you're very familiar with that run game. I was looking at different concepts. Like there was a thing I tweeted last week about Richardson running QB power and Jalen Hurts running QB power, and it was like the same play. There's a lot of similarities there.
Well, and it all starts with this fact. Keep in mind that when you have a quarterback like that, now we're talking, of course, normal down and distance situations. We know everything is different on third and long, that is. But in normal down and distance situations, 1st and 10, 2nd and 5, with the quarterback being a significant part of the run game and the start, really, in a sense, the starting point of the run game, not the back, the quarterback's the starting point. What happens is defensively a number of things. Number one, the safety to the side of the back, because the back's almost always offset. You're not going to see Richardson under center hardly at all. You're going to see him in the gun.
Pretty much offset pistol the whole time, right?
Right. So so the back is offset. It's kind of a shotgun. The back is offset. So the safety to that side is the extra quarterback player to the side of the back. Has to be, because you're playing 11 on 11 now. You're not, the quarterback is a factor. So you're playing 11 on 11. So with the safety having, in a sense, a significant run responsibility, particularly, let's say it's single high. If it's single high with 8 in the box, that deep safety, he's the extra quarterback player. Right. So what that does is that now creates opportunities in the pass game, because you understand as an offense what that means, and then now the kinds of ways in which you can attack with your route concepts, because you know that safety is starting to kind of move up a little bit, and he's also cheating to the side of the offset back. So it just creates, by NFL standards, relatively simpler pass game concepts for the quarterback to master early in his career, which is exactly what happened with Philly and Jalen Hurts. And then you add receivers, great receivers, and you get a lot of one-on-one matchups. Now, we'll see how it all plays out with the Colts, but from a tactical perspective, that's what you're going to get.
Yeah, I sent you an article I did on scheme fits, and I had Richardson in there. There was one, there was a deep pass, a vertical pass that Richardson threw against South Carolina, where the deep safety, the first thing he did was run screaming to, I guess, spy Richardson. And there were three guys spying him, so the receiver had kind of an open floor over the middle. And of course, with Philly last year, you saw that all the time.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I mean, look, I've spoken to coaches, and this is just the reality of life. Jalen Hurts improved dramatically last year,
Yes.
clearly. But the Eagles are not one of those teams. It's not like the old, Mike Martz offense where there's 1,000 concepts that you have to master. The Eagles' pass game does not have to be that way simply because of Hurts as a runner. What it does to the defense can actually simplify your offense and at the same time make it better. And that's, in a sense, exactly what happened in Philly. And that's what they'll strive to get accomplished in Indianapolis, which is why I personally believe Richardson will start from day one.
Yeah, and when we say this about, simplifying the passing game, it's not an indictment of Jalen Hurts. I would say that with his running ability and the ability to be the whole epicenter of the system, it would border on coaching malpractice to give him an Andrew Luck, Bruce Arians playbook when
Correct.
You don't need to. You don't need to burden him with all that stuff because he's so explosive in so many different ways.
And the impact it has on defensive alignments and responsibilities is what allows you to run. And I hate the word basic because that people get the wrong impression, but it allows you not to have that expansive playbook. You can run the same kinds of things over and over from different looks, different formations because of the Hurts factor. Hurts is the reason for this. They're hoping that Richardson will be the reason for it in Indianapolis.
And, you get busted coverages with that. I remember going back to people trying to play man against Colin Kaepernick. Remember that? Just running for 60 yards. You can't. It takes certain things out of your playbook when you have a quarterback who can be that type of runner. So you
got to be careful about playing. Even on third down now, I had mentioned normal down and distance, but even on third down, you have to be careful about man coverage or how you play man coverage. Whether you want to use a spy, whether you want to change your rush because you don't want him to escape. Obviously, your point's a really good one. It does limit what you can do on defense.
Right. And speaking of coverage, let's talk about press coverage. This is the press coverage portion of our program, Greg. And you and I have discussed on the X's and O's before that in today's NFL, with all the quick game, if you can't disrupt the receiver right off the line of scrimmage and press, you're going to give up a lot of easy completions, and your career is not going to go well. So this may be the best scheme fit overall in the entire draft to me. Is Maryland cornerback Deonte Banks goes to the New York Giants. And if there's two things we know about Wink Martindale, their DC, he loves to blitz and he loves to run man and he loves to run press man. And of course, we should specify that there is not, you can play press coverage and not play man. But if we're talking about press corners last year and how I charted it, Deonte Banks gave up 9 catches on 23 press targets for 48 yards, and his press reps were hilarious to watch. It was just rip after rep of receivers getting enveloped. And Banks, he has the aggressive mentality, the transitional athleticism, and the pure speed to just shut opponents down. And, the Giants put out a video of Wink Martindale, chest bumping and high-fiving everyone after they made the pick. And I'm like, yeah, no wonder you're so happy, Wink. This is your guy.
Well, it's really interesting because the Giants last year, for much of the season, were right near the top of playing cover one. And that's man coverage with a single high safety, which obviously is a Wink Martindale staple. As the year progressed, though, when you start to get to week 13, 14, 15, they started to play less of cover one and a lot more zone. And I'm sure that was because he just felt like he didn't have the people to do it and to do it at the level that needed to be done, to be successful. But that's, as you well know, and you just mapped out, that's what he wants to do. That's his MO. Certainly on third down, long yardage situations, he's very good at disguising pressures, and he wants to pressure, and he wants to play man coverage behind it. And Deonte Banks, to me, again, everybody has their own rankings of every position. I really like Deonte Banks. I thought he was the second best corner prospect overall in this draft class.
Wow.
And this guy he's a press man corner. You always love it when you can see a corner that you like against a really high-level wide receiver. And, obviously the game against Ohio State was, very informative. Really good matchup, both with Marvin Harrison, with Igbuka, who's, going to be probably a first-round pick as well next year, another 5-star receiver that Ohio State has. You're talking about a guy that has great length. He's got easy transition fluidity. I mean, he plays with a swagger. I just really liked his tape a lot. And I think you're right. I think when he was available for them to take, they probably said, hey, that's our guy.
I mean, it was when the pick happened. I remember because I wrote up the cornerbacks obviously before the draft, and I'm thinking, boy, he's who was your CB1, by the way? Gonzalez.
Yeah.
So and Deontay Memphis too. That's interesting. I did all my work, and I'm like, oh, best press cornerback in this draft. So when the Giants took him, I'm like, yep, okay, next check mark. Yeah. So the Cowboys last year ranked second in defensive DVOA, which is Football Outsiders' opponent-adjusted metric, but they ranked 23rd in power situations, 16th in stuff rate, and 15th in second-level yards allowed. When Osa Odigizua was not on the field, the interior defensive line that Dan Quinn had was not necessarily, how should we put this, great. So they get Michigan defensive tackle Mazi Smith. I mean, he can play. He's an inside guy. He's 6'3", 323. Reminded me of Dontari Poe. And one of the things I liked about Smith's tape, and I want to get your take on this, the Cowboys stunted a ton last year because they kind of had to. And Dan Quinn, he likes to get the fronts in kind of a petri dish thing anyway. I know that from his time in Seattle. So Mazi Smith had 12 of his 25 quarterback pressures last season came on some kind of stunt or game. And I'm thinking to myself, imagine him as the penetrator and Micah Parsons as the looper. Good luck with that. What are your thoughts on Mazi Smith?
Yeah. Well, first of all, they're moving Parsons basically to defensive end, which I personally think is the right idea because I just remember even going back to his rookie season when they moved him to defensive end basically out of necessity. And after 2-3 weeks, I was just saying that this guy's the best edge pass rusher in the league right now. So I think that's the right move. But Smith, to me, was someone you had to watch full games because, people are going to look at, I saw on Twitter, of course, social media, not only when he got drafted, but leading up to the draft that, he doesn't have production. Well, production for interior defensive tackles is an odd thing. Obviously, if you don't have a lot of sacks, people might view that as not having a lot of production. But, not a lot of interior defensive tackles have high sack totals. So you have to watch.
Just to break in, the ones that do are generally schemed up to do it. They're
with few exceptions. Obviously, we don't want to start comparing people to Aaron Donald, one of the greatest of all time. But for the most part, you're right. That's a great point. But I ended up watching a lot of games because number one, they had 3 guys that I wanted to see. But Mazi Smith was really fascinating to me because you're dealing with a guy that is 323 pounds, really good arm length. I mean, he played like an athlete. He is quick. Yes. He's fluid. Yet he was big enough and stout enough to dominate physically with strength to control and displace. But when you watch the tape, he was a very good pass rusher. He just didn't get sacks. Now, people might say, well, that means he's not, finishing. Well, no, you can win and the ball can be out for various reasons, or the quarterback can move and something else can happen on the play. But he won a lot as a pass rusher.
Yes.
And as I said, you had to watch games to see that because it did not show up on a stat sheet. And it's funny you mentioned the games because he was actually featured as a looper on TT stunts, tackle stunts, and he really showed excellent short area burst and even a little bend in closing speed. So you made the point that he can be a penetrator and Parsons can be a looper, and there's no question that will happen because Parsons is one of the most explosive athletes in the game. But this kid can also be a looper, and he showed the ability to do that.
He hurried C.J. Stroud on a play where he was, I believe, head up over the center, looped all the way around Paris Johnson, and got back in the backfield and hurried Stroud out of the pocket. And that's where I started to think Dontari Poe, people this big, this is Planet Theory now. People this big don't move this fast. So, yeah, he's and knowing what I know about Dan, he's going to love that guy.
Yeah, no, and in an ideal world, they would like him to be a starter from day one.
Yeah.
And obviously, there's many variables that go into that, but that's the hope.
When we're looking at the rest of their interior defensive line, I think that's the variable right there.
Yeah.
They're going to need him quickly. More press guys, Greg. The Steelers, who wanted to play a lot of press last year, did okay with it. But they went into this particular draft with a DNA that they wanted big, pterodactyl-like wingspan cornerbacks, and they got two of them in Joey Porter Jr., 32nd overall pick, first pick in the second round, and then Corey Trice from Purdue, who they got with the 241st pick in the seventh round. And we don't box score scout, but I want to give you a couple press numbers for these guys. Porter last year led 5 catches on 13 targets in press for 63 yards. This included, and I'm sure you've seen it, the 11-yard in cut to Marvin Harrison Jr., where Harrison caught it, but it wasn't easy because Porter was just all over him. And then Trice was in press on 7 of 40 targets last year. He allowed nothing. The only catch allowed when Trice was in press was Trice's interception in the red zone against Syracuse. So these two guys, it is very clear, and Terrell Austin and Mike Tomlin both said, we look at guys who can play press. This is what we wanted. This is what we went for. They went after it aggressively, and I think they probably hit a couple of home runs here.
Yeah, and again, a lot of people listening probably know about Porter, so I'll start with Trice.
Yeah.
Trice I watched, and I thought he was better than where he was drafted. I guess only time will tell. But because normally 6'3" and 3/8", 206-pound corners who play press get drafted higher. And again, we're not going to decide what his future is going to be based on a short shuttle time, but his short shuttle time was under 4.
I think it was the injury history that dropped him.
Yeah.
As far as I know.
And maybe that could be true, but, for a guy with that kind of length and his short shuttle time of 3.96 is ridiculous. I mean, his athletic testing numbers were really, really good. I mean, you're talking about a height and length corner, and this guy's a press man corner. I thought he was a really interesting prospect. As I said, surprised he got drafted where he did. There were a number of corners in this draft. I was surprised they were drafted where they were, but hey, that's the way a draft sometimes works out. Now, he's by no means a perfect corner. I don't want people to think that I thought he should have been a top 20 pick. Right. I did have a number of weaknesses on my evaluation sheet, but obviously the size, almost 6'4". He started out as a safety before moving to corner anyway. So that was really interesting. And then you get Joey Porter, who, some people might have felt dropped because he was the first pick on the second night. I mean, he's your prototypical height, weight, speed corner prospect. Yeah. I mean, his arm length of 34 is ridiculous.
Longer than Peter Skoronski. Longer than a lot of offensive linemen. That's
correct. Right. More than an inch longer than almost 2 inches longer than Peter Skoronski, which is kind of silly. And he's a press man corner. That's what he is. I mean, he's another guy that's, he's over 6'2". He plays with a little bit of a swagger. He's got a great playing personality, as I say. He used his long arms and his physicality to squeeze receivers out of bounds, particularly when he was the boundary corner, which I think in this league, he fits that role of a boundary corner where those guys, just like offenses say you need a boundary X receiver for your pass game to really be as expansive as you want it to be. A guy who can win one-on-one. As a defense, you want a corner that can prevent that from happening, a boundary corner, to cover the boundary X receivers to the short side of the field. Porter is that guy. Now,
your favorite guy, Gonzalez, by the way, is incredible at that. You throw a fade. No, don't. Just don't do it.
Yeah, so, I mean, the Steelers, obviously, they're telling us what they want to do defensively in the secondary by who they drafted and by who they let go, because Cameron Sutton was not that guy.
No. Good player, but not that guy.
No.
Speaking of letting people go and telling you what they want, so the Raiders take Michael Meyer, traded up to get him, I believe, 35th overall pick in the second round. This is about where I thought he should have gone. I think you and I discussed this, and I think
I would agree.
Yeah. But so Josh McDaniels comes in, and Josh is not going to be shy about this is what I want, this is what I don't want, and if you're what I don't want, get out of here. Darren Waller kind of got in his doghouse for whatever reason. They trade him to the Giants, and they get Meyer, who's I think people don't think of him as an explosive play tight end, but he led all tight ends in this class with 8 receptions on passes of 20 or more air yards. So he can do that. But what Dave Ziegler said about him, the GM, was it's the overall skill set. It's getting open in short spaces. It's, winning on 3rd and 6. And I went back and watched all his touchdowns. And that's where Meyer, I think, can be really effective in what Josh wants to do. It seems to me, and you might disagree, he almost wants the guy who can win at all 3 levels of the field, as opposed to like Waller, who can just take off and scald a safety, 30 yards up the seam.
Yeah, Meyer was a fascinating watch for me because you have to watch a lot of him because he's not a natural athletically explosive guy.
He kind of rumbles. He is not athletically impressive on tape.
No, I would agree with that. And that's why you've got to keep watching him, which, you and I do. And you probably wouldn't describe him as smooth and fluid, but he certainly has a refined sense and feel for how to use his vertical stem. Plus, he's kind of subtle and nuanced with his head feints, and he does have kind of deceptive short area quickness and that functional play speed. Like, he's not going to really run by you, but he is a 3-level guy, even though he's not necessarily just going to line up and stretch the seam. Right. He's just not that guy, and he's dominant at the catch point. I think that's what's really important. He is dominant.
That showed up. That was like his primary attribute to me. He'll just body.
The more I watched Meyer, and again, I watched him a while ago, so I noticed well after I made this comparison in my mind. When I make a comparison, as you know, Doug, I don't run to Twitter and put out my comparisons.
Why not?
I know I don't do that, but because I probably watched him 2 months ago, and I said he reminded me of Jason Witten when Witten came out of Tennessee. Obviously Witten's going to be a Hall of Famer, and it's easy to say, well, gee, Witten's great. Well, Witten, when he came out of Tennessee, no one thought he'd be Jason Witten. He was a 3rd-round pick. He was the 69th pick overall. It's just like George Kittle. George Kittle was, what, a 5th-round pick? Sometimes guys turn out to be really, really good players. But even Witten in his prime, you didn't watch Witten and go, man, that guy's an explosive athlete. He was just a really, really good football player. I think
my comp was Jason Witten. Yeah, it was my TE3, and my comp was Jason Witten. I kind of thought Ertz, and then Ertz was a little more explosive.
Yeah, to me, you can make the argument that Witten and Meyer's overall athletic and physical traits were somewhat similar. But I think he's going to be a good player. He may not be unbelievable early, but I think he's going to be a good player. And I think he's going to be one of those guys that when it's 3rd and 7, he's going to catch an 8-yard ball for a 1st down.
Another guy he reminds me of just in potential value is Jay Novacek. And I remember Troy Aikman saying, like when Jay retires, I'm retiring. I don't want to be on the field without this guy.
Novacek was a little more athletic.
Yeah, I know, but just the overall principle of he could be that valuable to his quarterback.
Correct. Because Novacek didn't catch, 90 balls, but he was obviously critical to that offense.
Yep. I want to finish with, of course, it's the Seahawks, and of course, it's 2 running backs they took because they're the Seahawks.
Big surprise there.
Very, very, could not be more different. Zach Charbonnet, or as we said yesterday, Chardonnay. I have to find out from my wife which cheese goes with the Charbonnet. And then Kenny McIntosh. They got Charbonnet with the 52nd pick in the second round, and McIntosh with the 237th pick in the 7th round. My comp for Charbonnet was an embryonic Marshawn Lynch, so no surprise he went there. I want to give you a couple numbers on McIntosh real quick. Ranked 7th among FBS backs last year with 42 catches on 49 targets for 509 yards and 2 touchdowns. His 12.1 yards per reception average ranked 1st among FBS backs. So 12.1 yards per reception, 12.3 yards per reception after the catch. So he's not spinning downfield. He's getting the ball, and he's kind of exploding into space. And he had 6 explosive plays as a receiver last year. I believe 3 were from the slot. So Charbonnet, I think we kind of know what he is. Kenny McIntosh, though, he's an interesting guy in that Shane Waldron offense.
Yeah, there's no question. I made the point that what stands out most watching his tape is his receiving ability and the location versatility within the formation that he brings to an offense. He can line up in the backfield. He can detach from the formation. He can run routes at all 3 levels. Again, because he's not a great runner per se, although he's not a bad runner, but that's not his thing relative to his receiving. There's always a play.
That.
What's that?
They already have Ken Walker. They didn't get him for that.
No, they didn't get him for that. And obviously they'd already drafted Charbonnet, so they certainly knew that McIntosh was not being drafted to line up and be a runner unless people get injured. But right. He's a really fascinating guy. He could step right in and become the third down back. I mean, my thought was he'd be most effective running out of 11 personnel, spread formations. It's going to be interesting with this team as a whole, because as you know, about 40% of their snaps a year ago, they played with multiple tight ends. Mm-hmm. And Pete Carroll made a point after the draft to talk about, we love our tight ends, because he didn't want, I guess, those guys to think that they're being phased out. But to me, and again, not that we're talking about Smith-Njigba, but you don't draft Smith-Njigba with the 20th pick in the draft, have him play 12 snaps a game. So it's going to be really interesting to me to see if they make a subtle or not so subtle transition to playing more snaps of 11 personnel, in which case McIntosh could become an interesting player in the context of that offense.
Well, I was watching his tape and I was thinking of how, and this is just my thought, that Sean Payton helped invent the nickel-based defense by taking Reggie Bush from the backfield to the slot. And your third linebacker's like, what do I do now? They can kind of do that with him. So yeah, interesting. And yeah, your three receiver sets are DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett, and Jackson Smith-Njigba. Then if you don't have any tight ends on the field and a back, and you put or two backs, McIntosh in the slot, and things get very interesting very quickly.
Yeah. And whereas Charbonnet is a totally different animal. Charbonnet's a runner, and actually he's not a bad receiver, but he's not an explosive receiver.
No, he's good on swings and screens. The release stats were a little weird, but that.
But I mean, we know how
they got him.
We know how Pete Carroll wants to play. Yep. They have Kenneth Walker, who is a really good mix of being able to run inside and then kind of find open space and really take it to the house. Right. Charbonnet's not necessarily a take it to the house back. He's much more of that decisive, physical, powerful, competitive downhill runner. He's got sustaining traits. Right. He gets hard yards, which, Pete loves that. And you have to do that in the NFL. Certainly if you're going to run the ball, you've got to be able to have a back who, when it's blocked for 3, is going to get 6. Charbonnet's more of that kind of back. Obviously he was a volume runner in college, certainly in his last 2 years at UCLA. He's not going to be a volume runner with the Seahawks unless Kenneth Walker were to get hurt. But he's going to get snaps, and he's the kind of big physical back that Pete likes.
It kind of reminds me of when the Broncos had Javonte Williams and Melvin Gordon. Not that Charbonnet is Javonte Williams, because Javonte Williams is an absolute freak, but that sort of thing, that sort of usage.
Yeah, so we'll see how that works out together, because where did they draft Charbonnet? 3rd round?
Second.
So again, you draft a guy.
Second year in a row, they drafted a running back in the 2nd round.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. I mean, look, we just mentioned Smith-Njigba 1st round, Charbonnet 2nd round. We have no idea how this is going to play out. But again, 2nd round is a high pick. You don't draft Zach Charbonnet in the 2nd round to have him, get on the field for 8 plays. Yep. So it's going to be very interesting how they work Kenneth Walker and Zach Charbonnet in the context of their offense.
And one final thought here. This isn't, he's a good back, but he's not Bijan Robinson. He's not Jahmyr Gibbs. He's not an offensive weapon. Like when you try and quote unquote excuse taking a running back 8th or 12th overall, you kind of have to say, well, he's an offensive weapon. He can do all this, whatever. He's actually better. 6.9 yards per carry outside the tackles last year. He's a better, speed guy than people might think, but that's not really who he is.
No. I mean, he's not
more of a thunder and lightning thing than, we're going to put him outside.
Yeah, he's not that 2nd and 3rd level breakaway speed guy. He's not necessarily a big play runner. He's not that guy, but I mean, he is. But he's tough to bring down. He runs through contact. He gets tough yards. He knows how to run. I mean, I just felt watching him that he was a better runner than athlete. Like, I thought he knew how to run. I thought he understood blocking schemes. I thought he had a great feel for how gaps change once the ball snapped. I thought he just knew how to run.
The contact power and the lateral agility and sort of the wide running style, that's where I thought of Lynch. Not that he is Lynch, because you have to make that point with all comparisons all the time. But that was another one like Deonte Banks from the Seahawks took him like, oh, duh. It just makes sense.
You mean the Giants? Deontay Banks to the Giants. You said to the Seahawks, yeah.
And when the Seahawks took Charbonnet, it was the same thing. Like, yep, there we go.
Yeah, I mean, in some ways, he's Chris Carson.
Yes.
And yeah. So, and Carson, who was he was a late round pick, I believe, and had 3 or 4 years there where he was just what Pete wanted. I mean, he was averaging 4, 5, 4, 6 yards per rush. Carson was a really good back in their system.
And I mean, this is conservative. You remember they took Rashad Penny in the first round.
I know.
What?
I know.
Okay.
Well, Penny has more juice.
Yeah. Well, Greg, you are a big play runner for us as always. We always appreciate the time and the insight, and we'll talk to you next week.
Thanks, Doug.